In the annals of ancient Rome, countless men have died chasing glory, but only one met an end, so savage, so grotesque, that even centuries later, his name drips with blood and molten gold. The richest man in Rome, Marcus Crassus, who discovered that the very treasure he worshipped would become his executioner. Imagine building an empire of unimaginable wealth, only to choke on the gold you craved. That is the brutal fate that turned the blazing deserts of Mesopotamia into the stage of one of history's most shocking deaths. A death that didn't just destroy a man, but threatened to fracture the Roman Empire itself. This is no mere story of a fallen general. It's a chilling testament to how greed can devour not just fortunes but flesh, how power becomes poison, and how the relentless pursuit of conquest can end in a spectacular downfall that even ancient Rome, with all its blood and iron, struggled to comprehend. In a time ruled by giants Pompey, the great Julius Caesar, and Crassus, the stakes were nothing less than dominion over the known world, and Crassus, obsessed with outshining his rivals, set his sights on Parthia, believing the sands of the east would pour gold into his coffers. Yet hidden beyond the Euphrates waited an enemy whose tactics and cruelty would redefine what it meant to suffer defeat. This isn't just Roman history. It's a brutal reminder of the cost of ambition, the secrets buried in the deserts of Mesopotamia, and the violent truths behind the Roman Empire's most humiliating disaster, known as the Battle of Carrhae. Stay with me as we descend into betrayal blood and the scream of molten gold, a story so savage it continues to haunt historians, archaeologists, and lovers of dark history alike, fueling viral legends across YouTube searches like Ancient Rome's Darkest Secrets, History's Most Brutal Deaths, and The Man Who Died by Molten Gold. Because this, my friends, is how one man's hunger for power became a cautionary tale echoing through the corridors of time. A tale of molten gold, broken empires, and the bloody price of boundless ambition. In the turbulent heart of ancient Rome, where marble columns cast shadows as long as empires, and the echo of ambition rattled through every Senate hall, three men held the fate of the known world in their iron grip: Pompey the Great, Julius Caesar, and Marcus Crassus. Yet beneath the surface of this so-called triumvirate, cracks were already forming, driven by power struggles, simmering rivalries, and the insatiable hunger for eternal glory that defined Rome's elite. Pompey commanded the Mediterranean, his victories at sea transforming him into a living legend. Caesar's name thundered across Europe, his conquests in Gaul expanding Rome's borders, and his fame, while Crassus, the richest man alive, stood beside them cloaked in gold, yet haunted by whispers that called him nothing more than a banker among warriors. For in the unforgiving world of Rome, where the value of a man was measured not merely by his wealth, but by the blood he spilled and the lands he conquered, Crassus felt an invisible chain binding his legacy, tethering him to the shadows of greater men. The corridors of power buzzed with rumors that he was the third wheel of the Triumvirate, a man whose vaults brimmed with silver and whose estates sprawled like miniature kingdoms, but whose name evoked no heroic battles nor songs of martial triumph. Every triumph of Caesar carved a deeper wound in Crassus's pride. Every accolade Pompey claimed fanned the embers of jealousy that smoldered behind Crassus's calculating gaze. He was a man trapped between colossal titans, yearning for a victory that would eclipse them both, a conquest so magnificent it would silence every tongue that dared diminish his worth. And in the shifting sands of the east, Crassus believed he saw his answer. Beyond Rome's eastern frontier lay Parthia, a realm glittering with promises of silk spices and rivers of gold, a treasure so immense it could make even Crassus's legendary fortune appear modest. To seize Parthia would mean not only unimaginable wealth, but military glory to match Caesar and Pompey, a legacy to etch his name alongside the greatest conquerors in Roman history, fueling countless viral tales of dark history and brutal downfall that even modern eyes would devour on YouTube under searches like Roman Empire secrets or history's bloodiest power plays. Yet Rome's Senate, wary of the balance of power, refused to grant Crassus the formal declaration of war he craved, suspecting that his ambition might ignite new fires of instability in a republic already trembling beneath the weight of too many egos. But Crassus, driven by visions of gold and empire, refused to be chained by politics. He saw Parthia not merely as a kingdom to conquer, but as the key to transforming his reputation from financier to warlord, from shadow to sun, from the banker in the corner to the man who brought the East under Roman dominion. His mind echoed with the thought that gold was not just wealth, it was destiny. And so, in a decision that would reshape the sands of Mesopotamia and stain Roman history with one of its darkest secrets, Crassus set his sights firmly on Parthia, unaware that every step toward his dream was carrying him closer to a nightmare, beyond imagining a nightmare that would begin to take form as he prepared his legions for the march into the east. By 55 BCE, the shifting winds of Rome's ambition were blowing eastward, driven by the relentless will of Marcus Crassus, who arrived in Syria under the mantle of governor, but with conquest burning in his veins. Ancient Rome, a city whose appetite for glory devoured continents, found in Crassus a man determined to forge his name in the crucible of war, no longer content to be merely the financier of empires. Even as senators in marble halls whispered their disapproval, fearing the volatile consequences of a war waged without cause, Crassus pushed forward, convinced that Parthia was the key to transforming his fortune from gold to legend. He gathered an army vast enough to shake the deserts, a force of 7 legions, nearly 40,000 infantrymen, drilled in the discipline that had crushed nations, accompanied by 4,000 cavalry, and an equal number of light infantry, a war machine gleaming beneath the relentless sun of the East. It was one of the largest expeditionary forces ancient Rome had ever committed to the eastern frontier, a living wall of shields and spears destined, Crassus believed, to tear Parthia's riches from the sands and deliver him eternal fame. Among those legions rode his son Publius Crassus, a young commander whose name already carried whispers of greatness, forged alongside Julius Caesar in the bloody forests of Gaul. For Crassus, this campaign was more than conquest. It was the foundation of a dynasty, a vision of his bloodline cemented in the annals of Rome beside the legends of Alexander and Caesar, ensuring that centuries later, historians, filmmakers, and countless viral YouTube channels would echo with tales of his glory or his doom under search terms like ancient Rome's forgotten disasters and military failures that changed history. Yet even as he marshaled his men and wealth, Crassus brushed aside the warnings of local commanders who pleaded with him to respect the unforgiving nature of Parthian warfare. He called their caution cowardice, blinded by the hubris that wealth could bend fate to his will, convinced that Roman legions who had tamed barbarian forests and stormy coasts would make short work of desert kingdoms. He believed the Parthians were a people fractured by internal strife, ripe for the taking, oblivious to the vastness of the desert and the lethal precision of horse archers who could vanish like ghosts. He saw no danger in roads stretching endlessly into Mesopotamia or in supply lines exposed beneath the searing sun. For Crassus was certain that gold, discipline, and Roman steel could conquer all. And thus, in a spring thick with dust and omen, Crassus prepared his men to cross the Euphrates at Zeugma, setting in motion a campaign whose echoes would become one of history's most haunting warnings, a march that would carry Rome's banners into the Mesopotamian sands and Crassus himself into a destiny darker than even the richest coffers of gold could foresee, a destiny that would begin to unfold as they stepped into the parched lands where Surena and the hidden might of Parthia lay waiting in silence. As the spring sun blazed over the shifting sands of Mesopotamia, Marcus Crassus led the legions of Rome across the Euphrates at Zeugma, banners rippling in a wind heavy with dust and destiny. At first, the march seemed to justify every ounce of his towering confidence, for wherever the eagles of Rome advanced, towns capitulated without resistance, their gates thrown open in trembling surrender, eager to spare themselves the wrath of a conqueror whose reputation gleamed almost as brightly as the golden riches he sought. The vast flatlands of Mesopotamia appeared to Crassus as a perfect stage upon which Roman discipline and tactics could shine, a chessboard waiting for the precise maneuvers of legionaries whose shields and pylons had subdued countless enemies across continents. Local settlements either submitted peacefully or fell swiftly beneath siege engines and Roman engineering brilliance, reinforcing the belief that Parthia, despite its formidable legends, was fractured and vulnerable. Intelligence reports spoke of civil discord within the Parthian court, whispers of internal strife that seemed to promise Crassus the easy victory he craved. fueling his conviction that Rome was on the verge of conquering the East once and for all, a triumph that would echo through dark history documentaries and viral YouTube searches like Ancient Rome's secret victories and forgotten campaigns that changed empires. Yet beneath the surface of this glittering progress, the sands themselves were conspiring against Rome. For Crassus's early victories were not triumphs, but the careful illusions of a master tactician waiting in the shadows. Surena, the Parthian general, whose name would soon be inscribed among the architects of Rome's most brutal military disasters. Surena did not rush to meet the Roman army in open combat, for he understood that his people's strength lay not in static defense, but in speed fluidity, and the lethal artistry of the Parthian horse archer whose arrows could strike from impossible distances, vanishing like phantoms before Roman swords could find purchase. Every skirmish was a deliberate retreat, a dance designed to draw Crassus ever deeper into hostile lands, further from his precious supply lines, into a domain where sunthirst and fear would fight alongside the Parthians. Scouts rode along distant ridges, their silhouettes teasing the Romans, before disappearing into shimmering waves of heat, leaving soldiers tense, exhausted, and half certain they were battling ghosts. Nights became a torment of whispered threats and unseen movement, as Roman sentries reported shadows flitting just beyond the campfires, sowing paranoia and breaking the iron discipline that had once defined the legions. Crassus, blinded by visions of molten gold and eternal fame, dismissed these tactics as cowardice, believing that one decisive battle would shatter Parthian resistance and cement his legend alongside Caesar's. But the desert was not Gaul, and the Parthians were no mere barbarian horde. Surena's strategy was a trap, woven from patience, deception, and the knowledge that even the might of Rome could be brought to its knees under the weight of relentless attrition, a truth that would reveal itself with harrowing clarity as Crassus's legions pressed ever onward, unknowingly, marching toward the unforgiving sands of Carrhae, where the illusion of victory would finally be stripped away. As the Roman legions pressed deeper into the Mesopotamian desert, beneath a sky that seemed to blaze with the wrath of forgotten gods, Marcus Licinius Crassus believed his path to glory was unfolding exactly as he'd dreamed. But the shifting sands beneath his feet were already whispering of doom. Local settlements fell quickly, offering no real resistance, feeding the illusion that Parthia was a kingdom trembling on the brink of collapse. But every surrender was a carefully crafted note in a symphony of deception, orchestrated by the brilliant Parthian general Surena, a name that even today echoes through viral history searches as one of the masterminds behind Rome's bloodiest disasters. Surena, young and cunning, led his forces in a dance of shadows, retreating just enough to lure Crassus further from safety, while Roman scouts brought back reports of empty plains and scattered Parthian riders who vanished into the heat haze like desert spirits. Crassus saw only opportunity where he should have sensed a trap, for Parthia was not merely a distant kingdom, but a civilization honed for centuries in the art of desert warfare, whose soldiers wielded bows that could kill from distances Roman tactics could scarcely comprehend. By the time Crassus reached the plains near Carrhae, exhaustion and heat had already begun eroding the discipline of his men, their shields blistering under the sun, while the silence of the desert hammered at their nerves. Then, on June 9th, 53 BCE, dawn broke over the battlefield, revealing the true shape of Parthia's wrath. Instead of infantry lines or siege engines, Crassus's legions found themselves facing a sea of cavalry, heavy cataphracts gleaming in scales of iron and silver, and countless horse archers whose arrows would soon darken the sky. The first wave of Parthian arrows fell like rain, a relentless storm that shredded Roman formations and rattled even the bravest soldiers, for these were no ordinary volleys, but precision strikes supplied by endless caravans of fresh ammunition. Roman shields designed for sword and spear splintered under the punishing hail, and morale began to fracture like pottery under a blacksmith's hammer. In a desperate bid to turn the tide, Publius Crassus, young and burning with the fire of his father's ambition, led the Roman cavalry in a thunderous charge straight at the Parthian center, unaware he was plunging into the jaws of a perfectly laid trap. The Parthian cataphracts absorbed the blow, locking Publius in a ring of steel, while the horse archers closed around him, loosing arrows from all sides, cutting down men who screamed for help that would never come. Before the stunned eyes of the Roman army, Publius fell, and his severed head mounted on a spear was paraded before his father's ranks, as a spectacle of horror so chilling that it would become a symbol of Rome's darkest day, destined to appear in every retelling of the Carrhae disaster, whether on ancient scrolls or modern viral videos dissecting the bloodiest battles of Rome. In that moment, something broke within Crassus. The man who had crossed the Euphrates believing himself invincible now stared at his son's lifeless features, swaying above the dust, his dreams collapsing like sand through trembling fingers. And though the sun still burned overhead, the shadows of Parthia were closing in, setting the stage for a retreat so chaotic that it would make the battle itself seem almost merciful, a retreat whose horror would unfold in the desperate hours to come. The death of Publius shattered more than just the ranks of Roman cavalry. It broke the fragile spine of an entire army, leaving Marcus Crassus staring blankly into the dust-choked horizon, where the Parthian banners rippled like flames in a nightmare. In the aftermath of that unspeakable horror, silence fell over the Roman lines, a silence so profound it felt as though the gods themselves had abandoned them. And it was in that silence that the seeds of disaster took root, growing swiftly into one of ancient Rome's most catastrophic military failures, destined to haunt historians and viral documentaries under titles like Rome's Greatest Defeat or Ancient Disasters That Changed History. Crassus, whose mind was once a fortress of calculation and ambition, now drifted between grief and paralysis, and his legions sensed the shift like animals scenting blood in the air. Men who had once followed his commands with absolute discipline now whispered of omens, cursed the relentless sun, and glanced nervously toward the endless dunes where Parthian scouts flickered like mirages. Supplies ran low, waterskins dried to brittle leather, and the sand seemed to swallow entire cohorts whole, as if Mesopotamia itself had turned against Rome. Under the cloak of night, Crassus attempted to salvage what remained of his shattered force, planning a covert retreat toward Carrhae, believing that urban walls might offer a temporary shield against the Parthian tide, but the desert had already claimed the Romans' cohesion. Exhausted, dehydrated, and driven by primal terror, soldiers abandoned formation, stumbling through the darkness, discarding armor that felt like ovens strapped to their skin, while others collapsed and were left behind, no longer brothers in arms, but desperate souls, clawing for survival. The Parthians, masters of psychological warfare, struck without warning, loosing arrows into the fleeing columns, igniting panic that rippled through the legions like a plague. Some Romans fell on their own comrades in blind fury, driven mad by thirst and the belief that they were already dead men walking. Others simply disappeared into the darkness, consumed by the sands, leaving no trace but scattered weapons and blood-stained footprints. By dawn, what staggered into Carrhae was not the mighty eastern expedition Crassus had once boasted of, but a ragged mob whose eyes were hollow and whose spirits lay buried beneath the Mesopotamian dunes, a testament to how swiftly Rome's arrogance could crumble under the weight of an enemy who knew not only how to fight, but how to shatter the human soul. Standards were lost, the eagles of Rome. Symbols of invincibility were nowhere to be found, and Crassus, his face carved by grief, stood among the survivors. The vision of conquest replaced by the stark realization that he had led thousands into a grave of burning sand and invisible arrows. And yet even amidst this ruin, a slender hope flickered, for word arrived that Surena, the Parthian mastermind, wished to parley, offering terms that might yet save the remnants of Rome's eastern legions, a hope that would soon draw Crassus into the next act of this dark history, a meeting where the fate of Rome would hang by a thread, thinner than the desert's shifting winds. Among the scorched ruins of shattered legions, and beneath the oppressive silence that hung over Carrhae like a burial shroud, Marcus Crassus clung to a fragile hope, the last ember flickering in the ashes of a campaign now etched among ancient Rome's greatest disasters. Word arrived that Surena, the enigmatic Parthian commander, whose name had already become synonymous with cunning warfare and viral legends dissecting Rome's bloodiest defeats, wished to parley, offering Crassus a chance to negotiate terms that might save the ragged survivors of his once mighty eastern expedition. For a man who had once dreamt of rivers of gold and triumphal processions through the marble streets of Rome, the idea of bargaining for the lives of his men felt like swallowing molten lead, but Crassus saw no other path, for the alternative was annihilation in the endless Mesopotamian sands. His officers argued bitterly, some urging him to refuse, convinced it was a trap, while others pleaded for mercy, their eyes haunted by visions of Parthian arrows and the severed head of Publius still floating in their nightmares. In the desert's pale dawn, Crassus consented, driven by desperation and the faint hope that honor might yet exist, even between mortal enemies, unaware that in choosing to meet Surena, he was stepping into the jaws of an even deadlier fate. The two armies held their distance as Crassus, accompanied by a small retinue of Roman officers, walked across the no-man's land between camps, a path lined with shifting sands that seemed eager to swallow every footprint. Parthian envoys awaited him beneath banners that fluttered like serpents in the wind, their smiles hiding secrets deeper than any Mesopotamian well. Accounts from ancient historians diverge on what happened next, but all agree that the negotiations dissolved in a heartbeat, as though a hidden signal had been given, unleashing a flurry of chaos that would seal Crassus's doom. Some claimed that a misunderstanding over ceremonial gestures triggered the violence. Others believed Surena had orchestrated the betrayal from the start, determined to capture the man who had dared to invade Parthia for greed alone. In a sudden eruption of shouts, Crassus and his officers found themselves overwhelmed by Parthian warriors who closed around them like steel jaws, weapons-drawn faces grim as the desert sun. Crassus, once the richest man in Rome, was seized and bound, his dignity stripped as thoroughly as his armor, and dragged into Surena's camp, a spectacle destined to become a symbol of Rome's vulnerability and the dark price of imperial arrogance, immortalized in chronicles and modern retellings under titles like The Betrayal That Broke Rome, or History's Most Shocking Treacheries. In that moment, as the desert winds whispered over dunes stained with Roman blood, Crassus was no longer a conqueror but a captive, his fate teetering on the knife's edge between life and a punishment so horrifying that it would echo for centuries, a punishment whose flames would soon be kindled in the molten gold that awaited him, casting the next and final act of this brutal chapter in Rome's history. History whispers a cruel truth that the very things we crave most can become the blades that cut us deepest, just as gold, once Crassus's god, became the molten fire that devoured him from within. His death is not only a footnote in Rome's dark chronicles, but a warning echoing across centuries. Ambition without measure can transform triumph into tragedy. If this story made you question how far you'd go for power or wealth, tell me in the comments below, would you have taken Crassus's path? Don't forget to save this video for the next time you wonder how history repeats itself, and subscribe for more untold secrets and brutal truths from the shadows of the ancient world.